Hello and welcome from all of us at Resolutions Northwest. We come to you today from lands along the Columbia River.
The Portland metro area rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, the Wasco,
Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook,
Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River,
creating communities and summer encampments to harvest and use the plentiful natural resources. If you know how to use the chat feature, we invite you to share whose land you're on.
We start here because we recognize 500 years of settler colonialism
and the African people brought here against their will.
We start here because we recognize this is not our history, this is our present moment. We start here because this is the starting place for the work that we do.
As we go through the training today, we invite you to do whatever it is that you need to do to stay engaged.
Take care of yourself or any children, animal, or any others that you're sharing your space with. We might even see them on camera too.
Our trainers make 4 promises to you. Number 1, we promise unfinished business.
This man and I have some unfinished business.
We will do our best to answer your questions and comments as we continue to move through the training.
Number 2, we promise to keep race on the table. So for example, if we're talking about gender,
we'll remember that women of color are the most impacted, particularly Black trans women and femmes.
That gets to our 3rd promise, to center the voices and experiences of those who are most impacted.
So we may ask you at certain times to hold back
so someone else can have the floor.
Or we might break into groups based on our different lived experiences.
And finally, we promise discomfort.
Talking about racism and white supremacy goes against some deep spoken and unspoken rules of U.S. culture.
It might activate strong feelings and reactions for you.
We trust that you can take care of yourself.
If you can't deal with this on your own, we got you. We encourage you to reach out to a trainer. If you are a white person, we ask that you reach out to one of the white trainers.
We also have 3 requests for you.
Number 1, stay engaged.
As we said it before, that can look many different ways.
Engage.
I've lost contact, sir.
What?
Number 2, remember, you're sharing this space with introverts and extroverts.
So we ask you to be mindful of how much space you're taking up.
My face!
And 3, we ask that you not share the stories that you hear.
Instead, just focus on what you've learned.
Sometimes we record these trainings. We won't use your image without your permission. Your trainers will let you know if this session is being recorded.
I don't appreciate being filmed, okay? I didn't want to be on camera.
As we go along, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns,
you can use the chat feature to let us know.
Click chat at the bottom of the screen.
And if you don't see that, click more.
You can send a message to everyone or one specific person.
Your trainers will respond to your questions as much as they're able to.
We might use a shared document. Your trainers will share a link in the chat. You can copy and paste it into a separate browser.
Remember, any changes you make will be shared with the group.
That's it.
Don't worry if you don't remember all this. Your trainers will help you out as we go along.
We hope you enjoy our time together. Peace.
Thank you, Jazz, for making that video possible. I think I'll go ahead and pass it off to Venus, and just want to share personally, Venus has been connected to RNW as an organization for so many years, both as a volunteer, kind of in our training and facilitation work, but also as a board member. And you bring so much to the table at any conversation we're having, and I look forward to what you bring today. So thank you for taking leadership on this particular piece, Venus.
Thank you so much, Christina. And of course, thank you to RNW for that video. I love that video. Every time I watch it, I always giggle. It's a good one. And I love that, you know, we're gonna talk about a few things, and one of them being, you know, this land. And, you know, sometimes we start with these land acknowledgements, and that is to recognize that we are on stolen land. And, you know, I'm biracial, so that means I carry more than one DNA in me, and I have two different separate genocides that reside in mine, and indigenous blood and African American blood through the genocide of slavery, and it's like I appreciate the land acknowledgement, and sometimes I feel some type of way when we leave out the fact that Black people were stolen as well as this land. So I always give props to that. Thank you. So going back to why we're here, my name is Venus Barnes. I use she, her pronouns. And as Christine mentioned, not only have I been a long time groupie of Resolutions Northwest, I am currently residing on the board. My journey started, I can just go back a little bit. I was a college student and a single mom, happily divorced from a very terrible marriage of 11 years and decided to go back to school. And during my my academic career, I became housing insecure quite quickly. The end of my spring term, I had to pay $300 in addition to what I was paying already through all the other rent increases. And I was in the boat of a lot of people that I didn't realize I was in. And so I had 30 days to decide to pay an additional amount. I started that year with my housing at $750, and I was now asked to pay at the end of spring term $1,200. That's quite the jump as a student living off of financial aid. I actually quit school. And the story, the reason why I tell it every time is because this is not just my story. I share the story with many thousands of students and Oregonians who will be leaving the academic scene and becoming citizens, supposedly productive citizens in Oregon who contribute to our economic state. And when I left school, I got into housing, and we'll talk about this a little bit. I got into housing. I was so excited that Venus wasn't going to be homeless, not once, but again while I'm in school. And I moved into my house and went to the grocery store. I was so excited. You don't even understand what that means to me of being, having one part of your basic income or basic needs met. I went to the store here in Oregon City and realized Venus is in Oregon City and not North Portland. The reason why I say this is because I realize I've lived here most of all my life. And even though traditionally our families are who are Black, African American, or brown were redlined over to North Portland, I realized I had never visited Oregon City, and I'm 43. I've lived here 5 years and I'm still not wanted. But you better know that Oregon City knows that Venus lives here now. All I have to say is, the video mentions we have to navigate this world differently. You heard from other videos that you were watching. It's not easy. And this is why this topic is so important around food sovereignty, food justice, food liberation, whatever you want to call it. Sometimes we forget that when we're talking about equity, we have to talk about all the individual systems, whether that be school to prison pipeline, our food system, our judicial system, our medical system. There's, racist medical practices that go on as well. And I would really like to introduce our panel. I've got to work with Eddie Hill in the past, about a year ago. You'd be surprised, Eddie, someone emailed me asking about the very workshop that we partnered with. And I also got to meet Malcolm at the Black BIPOC market. And then I'm just now meeting James. It's good to see you, James. We've contacted each other through email. As I'm introducing each one of these individuals, I'd like to read their bio just so you get to know them a little bit about who we're with. And then we'll get started in a few of the questions that will kind of ground us in what we're all looking at. So the first person I'd like to start with is Eddie Hill. I see that you put your pronouns in your box. I see that you use he, him pronouns, Eddie. Thank you so much. Eddie's with the Black Food Sovereignty Coalition. He's the co-director. And he is an innovator, a driver of work at the intersections of food justice, food systems improvement, and the BIPOC food economies for the Black and Brown people of the Pacific Northwest. Thank you, Eddie. Starting as an organic small acre farmer apprentice in Olympia, Oregon, he continues to promote and demonstrate how community-based food systems and equity, green workforce development intersects. And he also advocates for an innovative environment and food-based program and businesses developed for the Black community in the Northwest, helping to launch Rainier Beach Urban Farm and Red Barn Ranch Farms for the Tilth Alliance, and working at Growing Power with Will Allen and consulting the intersectionality on urban design and the urban farm projects as a food system planner. You do a lot, Eddie. I know you do. And I know those are not all the things that you do, because I can barely get a hold of you sometimes. This man is never not running.
Yeah. Yeah, much appreciated. Yeah, I was listening to the list. I'm like, ooh, I gotta do like 3.
You gotta update that.
Yeah, it's gotta get truncated. Yeah, hi, hey, good to see you, Venus. With everybody else on this day, I'm glad to be here. Thank you. And that's Olympia, Washington, for the Washington State people who winced. Olympia is the capital.
Is Washington. And if you're from Washington, it's Washington, by the way.
Washington.
I was born and raised in Tacoma. Okay, movie.
Tacoma.
And now I'd love to introduce Mr. James Crowder. You work in policy. You're welcome to, yes, your pronouns I see are he, him, his, and thank you so much for being here. James is a senior associate, is a committed advocate for policy and programs that improve the quality of life for low-income families and distressed communities of color. Thank you so much for doing that work. And he also brings over 10 years of experience in the field of affordable housing and community development. Most recently, he's worked in the nonprofit sector as a program officer in the Philadelphia office of the local initiatives support corporations, which is LISC for acronyms. And in the role, he helps draft a community-driven equitable development strategy to support residents in a gentrified neighborhood of West Philadelphia. Prior to LISC, he worked in the private sector as a consultant with BCT, which I don't know that acronym, partners, providing technical assistance for the cities in the U.S. Department of Housing and the Urban Development Choice neighborhood programs. He has also worked in the public sector, spending 7 years in the varieties of policy analyst roles with the New York City Department of Housing and Protection and Development. And he's also hold a bachelor's degree in communications and a master's in public policy degree from, I'm gonna hope I can say this right, Rutgers University.
Great, that's great.
Okay. As well as a Master's of Arts in the African American Studies, I could say that one, of Columbia University. James is excited to bring his passion and commitment to social justice policy link, and along with his unwavering loyalty to the Philadelphia Eagles. And I hope you have some some residency here too, because now you're with us, Jace. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be with you all tonight for this discussion. I tuned in time to hear Nicole speak, and I love the way that she brought kind of the tone and the mood in the room. So I'm happy to join this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. And lastly, but not least, my man, Mr. Malcolm. I met Malcolm at the BIPOC market. You were awesome. He's our local farmer. I'd like to briefly read his bio real quick. Malcolm is a father, a grandfather, and a third generation community organizer. He is the co-director of the Black Futures Farm and Southeast Portland, and a member of the BFSC, which is the Black Futures Farm Coalition, I believe, and leadership team. And he has many jobs that includes assembly line work, making Doppler radar rings. I'm not sure what that is. I'll give you an opportunity to explain what that is. He's a journalist, a tech writer, high school and elementary school teacher, counselor, U.S. weatherman, and a video game tester. That's amazing. And a book peddler. Malcolm's first book is 144 poems and essays for God, truth, love, and justice and peace, and hip hop. That was published in 2015 by Tan Lane Press. Thank you so much, Malcolm, for being here. Are you on, Malcolm?
I had to unmute myself. Okay. Hey,
yes. There you go. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, hello, Eddie.
So, Mal.
Listen, I see it every day. So, hi, Eddie. I love you. Yeah. Yo, brother James, and he from my neighborhood, and he from my city. Me and my wife was over here like, yo, how many degrees this dude got? What has he done? He's still talking about the same dude.
I should have said a shorter one. I'm sorry.
That's Philly. That's Black excellence. That's how I grew up. Yes. You know, if you're gonna do it, do the damn thing. Don't do it halfway. If you're gonna get an education and get the best education you can get, hit them with all the weapons, bro. I'm so honored to be in company with you and on a panel with you. I don't know why I didn't meet you before now, but we together now, okay?
I appreciate all y'all. I appreciate all the love from Portland.
Now we on the same team. Let's do the damn thing. And I want to say BFSC is the acronym for the Black Food Sovereignty Coalition. So Eddie is the director. I'm one of the sub-directors. In conjunction with my awesome wife partner, Mirabai, who's right next to me. So don't be over here talking crazy because she can hear you.
I might have to ask her a few questions.
Oh yeah, no, please do. I'm happy she was able to make it. She was doing a fundraiser earlier, so she, she works very hard. Yeah, I'm just really honored and to be here to do this work. I've actually worked with Nicole a little bit on some consulting gigs, and she's a brilliant woman. And I'm glad we had her energy to kind of open up this session, and also work with Melody, the second person whose video we didn't get to see. The cool thing about Portland is it's a small community of some really activated, intelligent, forward-thinking people, and I'm honored to be here doing the work that we do. So, yeah, and Philly all day.
Okay. My grandfather's from Philly. He raised me.
Yeah, well,
city.
You was raised right.
Folks too. Interact with us in the panel. Please, if you could, keep yourselves muted so we don't have background noise or anything like that, or that we're not interrupting people speaking. So go ahead and feel free to use the chat. I'm inviting everyone, place your questions, your comments, and things like that. I have a couple people on our team sort of keeping an eye on that chat that will probably interrupt us. So there's not too many people talking all at once, and then we'll get to your questions as best we can. If you feel like maybe we've missed your question, because the chat can kind of get a little crazy. There's almost 30 people on the call. There's 27 of us here together. Go ahead and ask it again. And if that doesn't work, I'm gonna try my best to keep an eye on the chat, but it's kind of hard to do both. This is a weird time that we're in, so I can't see people's hands raised in real time. We'll just do our best, and feel free to email us if we get to your question. We'll do our best. With that being said, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and being with us here today in this discussion. One of the things I'd like to do is sort of ground us. We opened up, we've heard a little bit about, acknowledging this land and the folks that are here. I would like to take us a little back on a little bit about, how we got here. And so maybe who can speak to this, and this panel, also Eddie, James, and Malcolm, please feel free. We're just gonna have an open discussion. I'm not gonna call on anyone really.
Popcorn.
Popcorn. And whoever feels inclined to sort of briefly discuss a little bit of Oregon's history in the relationship to Black folks in particular, and why we have been sort of governed in this area with white supremacy philosophy that has been in this state, and how we're seen as such a progressive place, but then we sort of forget about how Oregon even became a state.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know who wants to take that, Eddie. I feel like your hair is on fire for it. Go ahead.
It kind of is. It burned off last night thinking about it. Do y'all mind if I start with that one?
Go for it.
Sweet, thank you. It was back in the day. It was. And so the Oregon Trail, all that stuff, right? So the territories, and think 10 years before the Civil War, right? So think 10 years before the stock market crash, 10 years before World War II started, what was happening, what types of things were fermenting, what types of attitudes, unchecked with no conversations about equity or inequities in 1850, 1848. Mm-hmm. People are thinking, like, hey, I want to get the hell out of the East Coast because there's too many damn Scandinavian, Swedes, and Turkish people. I can't figure out if they're WASPs, or it's not easy for us anymore. And there's so people move west, expansion. So under that colonial dictate of, God and country, the new crusades, it ventured west, and the Oregon territories and the Spanish and the Russians and everybody sort of swirling around here. So this guy, George Washington Bush, and there were two of them, African-American men. The other one is Black. One is Black native, and the other is mixed freeman from Ohio, who left Portland, Ohio to Missouri to meet his Jewish business partner to become a farm owner and cattleman, a granary business for Millery, or mills, not Milleries, to come out and build that in Oregon, because, Oregon was cracking. People was like, oh, snap, it's not the South. We can go do our thing. And he had money. He had been in the military. He was a vet. He had cash. He was carrying gold bars. He had a white passing wife, Irish from Cincinnati, just like a lot of other Black folks in Cincinnati are white passing. I got cousins. I got to go in the back door. I can't come through the front door because I'm too dark. I'm too dark. So they brought that with them, and they get to Oregon. They're like, nah, like, you can't be here, bruh. Like, you got money, you got business, and there's a Jewish person with you. Yeah, no, he can stay. You got to go. So they tried to get settled, couldn't buy land, was trying to, go around things, get to the courts. And a friend of his was in the White House, or near the White House, near the president, and from the war, because he had been a trapper too. So this cat was a Renaissance man, and he had skills, could, knock a fool out, or negotiate, treaties, obviously, because he didn't get in any trouble. It was never attacked by indigenous people in the area. Mm-hmm. So ends up, he has to go across the river. Oregon loses this asset, and George Washington Bush helps found Centralia, Tumwater. Washington sets up a 3-year grain growing situation, has this seed that he knows how to rock that saves everybody in Washington for 3 or 4, it was a 3 to 5 year drought, and then like this weed biophage thing that, bacteria messed up, and he had the only grain in the area, so saved everybody, all the cows, and boom, boom. One of his sons became the founder, one of the original trustees of WSU. Black folks. Oregon missed on that economic opportunity to establish itself. It rejected the trend of liberated Black people with money coming here. They were like, no slaves, no, none of y'all. Even the ones who can do landscape architectural drawings. One of the most famous maps of Oregon, of Portland, was drawn by a black draftsman architect. But all the reasons he couldn't do that shit in 1856. So the territories of Washington were turned into a state primarily because Oregon didn't want, and they were tied into Confederacy dollars that were coming here. They knew 6 years before the war that the war was coming. They knew that, so they came out, they set up the territory, boom, no black people, no slavery. We won't have slavery, cool, but no, nothing other than us. White utopia, apartheid state, the only apartheid state in the country, in the union, territorial union, that has an apartheid clause. It is South Africa. Oregon, just like New Mexico is Spain, Oregon is apartheid South Africa and Israel. So because of the context and the boundaries that is set in its constitution. So those constitutions became the groundation of land ownership and participation or not participation. If black people couldn't own land here until 1929, which was the year of the collapse of the first collapse of the empire, that, just like at the war, they call on black people during the war, like, when y'all losing, right? It's just like, things are really bad, we need your help, here's some money, here's the CARES Act, here's some funds. We've been crying for this money for 50 years, and then it's just like, we'll dump $63 million on you right now with no infrastructure to manage it. But we'll come to that after we talk about land. So the land thing, we were never able to establish. The tribes never got into there was very separately established, like with the Morrill Act, OSU and the land grant colleges and WSU, and we're gonna farm the hell out of Oregon and Washington, and it is our domain to do so. And the tribes, they had a few tribal wars and some incursions, but mostly they suppressed it and killed everybody, wiped out a lot of folks with some diseases, and didn't manage them and let it flow through, and it made it easy, like carpet bombing with blankets. So actually just their presence and not acknowledging it, and actually acknowledging it on paper. They wrote about it. Now we know that on a History Channel tells us everything. So that biological warfare and that combination of not being able to root ourselves is very much the created the outcome that we exist in now. Happening is white dominated land holding, land management, conservation management, farming, food systems domination of the dominant population that already knows everybody. They feel real commune with each other, and that's okay. I have nothing wrong with white people working in community. I love Germans, Quakers. I like the Amish. I've been down to the Mennonites. They're cool as shit. But the rest of these folks, that's why I left Tilth. I quit Tilth at the height of my career because I was experiencing the same thing I heard on that video about the staff of resolutions. I was like, oh shit, I had talked to folks already. We was already having conversations with black folks. Like, do we need to mess with that organization? Or the race and food thing we did. We did it because we thought it was time to just throw it on the table. Like, yo, like y'all up in some business you ain't supposed to be up in. And I don't know, the black staff, it doesn't sound supported. And we want to help make that change too. So, in a functional way, because this thing has to work. We can't stop feeding people. We have to buy land. They're going to give us land. We're getting money because we're black. We're getting money because we're indigenous. Why? Because it is now calculated and known that there are numbers and metrics to how much we haven't been getting, to how much we don't have. So there has to be again, at the end of the world, it's great to figure it out, I guess. So here we are at the end of the world, and white folks are like, oh shit. And then, also black folks, because people within our own communities have been fighting against environmental justice, against agriculture because it's a slave thing, or, but a whole bunch of politicians in the last 12 months have jumped on Urban League, now green jobs, our city council, and people who rejected Laquita or me or Ty Schwefferman at Urban League 10 years ago, who was talking about a farm for black people. These were all things that I came into Portland leaving dejected and rejected from Seattle after a decade of food systems work, and saw, there was the decade of women in ag, and that didn't frustrate me. I was happy, but what it did was unleash a dominant population of white liberal women who had capital money from either their husbands, from Carhartt, from, you know, their friends, and from their pay it forward Cornell homies that we never got the time to tap into, because we out here trying to keep gentrification, you know, like to make it a term. You know, we had to force APA, American Planning Association, in 2011 to accept the reality that food systems was a course of study. Like, you know, what the hell, right? Like, you know, like it's like kind of trying to like force somebody to understand that food requires transportation and roads. They're like, well, I thought it was just food. How does it get there? We're in a truck, fool. So, you know, so we've gotten through a decade of both entering the arenas that urban planning, architecture, design, engineering, policy making, while folks have been monetizing the food system, even the justice-based food system, we have still not gotten a position, a hold where we have enough roots in it to be rolling. Like the assumption, you come in the room and say, oh, you're a farmer, so you must know everything. Here, we're just gonna roll like this. It's like, I'm sorry, I don't have capital stack. I don't have this. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I'm not, you know, like I can learn it real quick, but don't act like I went to Ivy, or don't act like I read that book and, you know, learned about vertical agriculture in an online class at MIT. I didn't. I learned that shit on the street, talking to Rollo, who's been doing this shit in the alley for the last 25 years. And none of y'all, you know, this is for real. You know what I'm talking about? So there's brothers and sisters in garages doing this stuff that everybody, permaculture shit, that's South Bronx. So it's just to this region, I'll close out, to this region, those inabilities to root, to own, to create legacy is now on the table. And a lot of the folks through like the Back to the Root conference, bringing it back to land, is having a deep relationship and open about, we need to have relationship with indigenous, native, tribal populations that have been here or came here. They got first right. We don't have, again, we sort of have this, somebody said it earlier, there's a special thing about Oregon and its land. It's untainted by slavery. Officially, there was no slavery here. Constitutionally, it was accepted, blah, blah. So that mindset is no slavery, but I can still hate you in a more creative way. So in that, it has an absence of certain energies and a distinct understanding that we as Black people have to recreate agreements and relationships with indigenous people before we do anything here. And once we do that, then in union, which is the foundation for Black Food Sovereignty Coalition and our work, as you'll hear from other folks, is to design, act at the intersections of that relationship, decolonize our treaties with each other. We have none. We never got any treaties with each other. The best treaty that was ever made was with George Washington Bush, when he founded Tumwater on very sacred lands. And that tree is still there where he planted, and he had relationship with the tribes so much that I think George Washington Bush #2 might be one of his chillins, which, you know, it makes sense. He's Black and Native, carried his name, but there's two different stories in Washington that they're two different people. I looked at him, I said, yo, that brother, you know, like, yeah, that brother, it's different. So and the latter one is darker. So he must got with straight indigenous, right? So like OG. So that genetic is a story and a connection that we have that has been driving me for 27 years in the Pacific Northwest to use as a catalyst for a land-based reacquisition. 160 acres of land were given to every single white man who wanted it. And 3 Black women in Corvallis won court cases against white men to get their land back and hold it, which is testament to sisters. That's another thing about Oregon. Black women here can do things that we can't. And it's imperative that we be working in union, in balance, in healed space with Black women. That's why I'm rocking with Venus, because she's down. And she brings other folks and, you know, like gets people to the table. Mirabai, same thing. She be providing the other things I don't want to see, can't see, and unable to see because of her skills and expertise and her strengths. Without that, like, you know, our organization is grounded in that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Eddie. I mean, you've covered a lot, and I just want to hit a few points. I mean, when we think about Oregon, we just think like in the past, it was just a state. we're not told that history piece of the Constitution of like, we don't have slavery, and we also just don't have Black people. And in order to become a state, I mean, when Oregon wanted to become a state, we were just a region. When we sort of went to the federal government to become a state, the federal government was like, yo, that Constitution is too racist. You got to take that out, and then you become a state, and then whatever you do after that, whatever. So that just tells you, you know, Oregon is very unique when it comes to their history and how they deal with not just, you know, BIPOC, but intentionally Black and Indigenous people that are here in this area. And you touched on, you know, land too. Like, we all know in this country, in order to gain wealth and generational wealth, that is, those dots are connected to land, you know, whether there be a house or a farm or you know, an industry on your land. That is how you get inherited wealth. And you're right, we have been able to calculate what BIPOC folks have been missing, and more intentionally Black and Indigenous folks. And gentrification has you know, been tragic for the Black community. I want to also
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, James, I also want to invite James, yourself, and Malcolm to touch upon anything else, you know, when it comes to, when we're thinking about not just the history of this land and area, but like how policies and procedures had developed, and how we still have those ghosts lingering around the things that we see today. Because it's 2020. I'm able, how do we connect, you know, back in the 1700s to the exact same thing that are happening in 2020 for us?
Yeah, I feel like Eddie said all the good stuff. So I'm gonna try and figure out what has not yet been said. But I think that that frame around land, and it's particularly the way that you touched on CARES Act, and the way that the country at the federal level kind of responds to national crises, and the way that people of color have been left behind historically in those moments of recovery. And so we can take it all the way back, right, to the Civil War and the 40 acres and a mule that never happened, right? You talked about, Venus, you talked about the intergenerational transfer of wealth and intergenerational transfer of poverty. When you think about the folks that worked the land in the South versus those that were able to benefit from that land in the South, even after they seceded, President, you know, there was the Field Order 15, William T. Sherman, which established 40 acres and a mule, but then President Johnson, after Lincoln was shot, rescinded that. And so had that happened, like Venus said, we would not be in this place. Similarly, in the recovery, like Eddie touched on, from the Depression, you had the New Deal and the federal, the FHA, right, which created the 30-year mortgage, which created the ability for folks of low income to be able to become homeowners in the first place. But who was left out of the FHA loans because of redlining? People of color and Black people again. So we weren't able to benefit from that recovery either. You think about World War II and the GI Bill. Again, I think like 1 or 2% of the people that were able to benefit from homeownership opportunities from the GI Bill were people of color. And we can talk about, you know, South Bronx, and I think the Bronx is burning in the 70s is a reflection on the conditions in these neighborhoods as a result of policy. So it wasn't just the redlining in the 30s and 40s and the 50s. You also had restrictive covenants where neighborhoods decided, you know, okay, so developers or real estate brokers, you were not allowed to sell, or owners, I'm sorry, you weren't even allowed to sell your home. You're by deed, you were restricted from selling your home to a Black person. I think those are still in place in a lot of places today. In Philadelphia, for example, there's still like 4,000 in the Northeast that still have restrictive covenants on them. You know what I'm talking about, Malcolm. And then I think I was, and so we won't talk about zoning, but yes, land has always been the linchpin and the challenge. And I think we're going to talk about some potential solutions as we get there around like the need for community land trusts and things like that. But I'll stop there. And yeah.
Thank you so much, James. Yeah, people kind of forget about, we have such short-term memory. I mean, this COVID is not helping as far as like month after month. I forget what day and time it is. But we really do have short-term memory when it comes to our history and like how we got here and how we think we don't have to talk about some of those policies and procedures that continue to linger and continue to oppress us in very harmful ways. Malcolm, did you want to touch upon a little bit about Oregon's history as well? I wanted to invite you in.
Yeah, I don't want to. I think Eddie pretty much did the comprehensive thing about the history, and then also, I put in the chat. There's a timeline when I first moved here and started doing equity work. My first job here in Oregon was I work at the Oregon Food Bank as the equity coordinator, and that's actually where I met Melody. And so the nature of I just want to say this: the nature of white supremacy and anti-blackness is ubiquitous. So the entire basis of America is based on white supremacy and the theft of native land and anti-blackness, the exploitation of Black people. So for us to highlight one policy, it's the law of the land. It's the culture of America. That's why to disassemble white supremacy is to fundamentally alter what America is. And it's why it's such a big task and it's so hard for us to imagine. And we keep trying to put all these fixes, like we're trying to put a small pinky-sized Band-Aid on a tumor that is invaded 95% of our body. And it's a wonder that the thing is still breathing at all. Like, that's how I look at it. Yep. This shit is unfixable. You know, it's unfixable. It's shot beyond saving, and it's not worth saving. What is worth saving is the human life that's here and the human beings in the communities that we have. That's what's worth saving. This thing that we call America, and I'm saying it, and Eddie knows this, we're both vets. Like, you know, I reserve the right to talk as much shit about America as I can, because I already put my life on the line. So can't nobody tell me nothing about this country. And because I'm the product of an excellent Philadelphia public school education, you know, I know the Constitution backwards and forwards, the Bill of Rights. I grew up in a bus ride away from the Liberty Bell. So you can't tell me nothing about this country and how beautiful it is. And it is beautiful, and the people are beautiful, but the core of it is fucking rotten. So having said all that, and to know that Malcolm X said the basis of power is land, and Black people have been systematically dispossessed and deprived of and kept off the land in so many nefarious ways. For a Black person to have land is like damn near like seeing a unicorn. Yep. And for us to have the ability and the generational ability to work and profit from that land, and the sophistication to know how to leverage that land into like financial security for ourselves and for our children, is like seeing a unicorn with fucking wings. So the very few people who know this, you know, Black people were moved in the Great Migration from the South to the North for jobs, right? So that's when like Chicago blew up. That's when Philly blew up. That's when Detroit blew up. That's when a lot of people moved north to California. A lot of people came from Mississippi and Texas to Portland. You know, we find these great migrations of people who are brought here simply as labor to work in the factories, some people to work in the fields. They moved them to Vanport. If you haven't heard of Vanport, please look up the history of Vanport, because it was a mostly Black, but integrated community that was destroyed basically because it was too cool and too successful, and people were coming together, and there was some kind of environmental thing, and they flooded that shit, and they could have saved it. Like New Orleans and the levees. So Black dispossession and Black people being screwed over by the system is the basis of our system. Like Tulsa and Rosewood. Yeah. So if we, in terms of policy, I really firmly believe, and I used to work in policy for the city of Oakland and in Alameda County in California, policies have to look at the original harm.
Yes.
Policies have to look at the causes and not just the effects. It should be 60-40, 80-20. Like, let's treat the effects, but let's put the majority of resources and good thinking and action into addressing these root causes, right? And so how do you un-racist America?
That's the money question, right?
How do you return an agricultural people? I'm talking about African people, people of African descent. Mm-hmm. How do you take a people from their place of origin where they were masters of the soil and the seed and of animal husbandry. And that's why we didn't come here just because we were Black. Like, we came here and because we were easily identifiable. We were brought here because we knew how to grow shit, because we knew how to grow grains and seeds and I can't even think of the word, vegetables, which I grow. We knew how to grow food, right? Africa was the world's breadbasket. And so they took all these agriculturalists and scientists and artisans and craftspeople and brought them here and enslaved those people for like 16 to 25 generations and stole all our knowledge. So now you put a seed in a Black person's hand and they don't know what to do with it. You know, like they literally don't know what to do with it. They don't know that, you know, most crops are not growing in the winter. Right. You can't grow bananas outside in Portland. Like, we just don't know these things. And that's unnatural for us not to know. You know, that should be like common sense shit, because it's what we had for the millions of years before we came to America. But 246 years of bondage, and then another 153 years of legalized bondage and second-class citizenship has taken away what we came here with. And so Black Futures Farm, which is a program of the Black Food Sovereignty Coalition, is about, I said all that to say this. Yeah. Black Futures Farm is about healing that connection, right? And reclaiming that connection and bringing our people back to the land and back to one another and back into our power and back into our knowledge of what we had before and of ourselves. So we're Black first, we're Black all day.
That's great.
Yeah, so that's my piece.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. I really appreciate you bringing that perspective too, because it's not about just, this is what I would find when I am in charge of the learning garden at the community college. First of all, I had no idea how to plant anything. And thank God it was a learning garden, because I was like, it's a learning garden. I kill things, I grow things. We're learning. Yeah. Which is great. And YouTube is your friend. Anyone can garden. That's another thing, is like demystifying like what this means. Really, my mindset was just what Malcolm had just described, of like, we need to get back to this knowledge that we already, this is embedded in us. This is in our DNA. It's unnatural for us not to participate in this manner. We've been programmed to participate in a capitalistic mindset of like, if I need limes, for example, I go to Safeway. Well, 3 years ago, someone was in my garden and said, oh, I went to get limes, Venus, and they were completely out. So I went to the next store, they were out. And then they found out that the whole shipment was destroyed because of climate change. And we can connect all of these dots of the why. We could do a root cause analysis of all the whys. Why we even talk about climate change, because we don't have an indigenous mindset of thinking 7 generations out, right? Because we've participated in white supremacy, who lifts up capitalism. So these are the things that I was passionate about expressing or talking to my students. But you're right, Malcolm, you put that seed in their hand, they're like, what is this? What do I do with this? And I get really excited when folks are at least curious to know more about food sovereignty. I'd like to touch upon what you were saying. Not only is we're inherently knowledgeable, and we just need sort of like this, we just need time and space to talk and learn, but the healing process of folks, brown folks, you know, because we have Hispanic people that are, immigrant folks that we don't ever talk about with our food system today. You know, before we talk a lot about like slavery and how we were stolen with our craftsmanships and coming here, and we forget that we still have slaves. We just pay them slave wages to barely survive. And you know, what does that mean when I'm teaching someone in our community of how to grow things and then connect back to the land, and then those that generational trauma that resides in my DNA comes out. It permeates along with cultivating the land. I mean, there's a lot of trauma that we have to address when we're introducing our communities of color back to the land.
Mhm.
I'd like to touch a little bit about that. Like, what is our desired outcome if we could create a coalition, if we create a network of Black and brown folks to connect back the land, to be food liberated? Well, I don't have to buy a lime from Safeway or wherever. I grow my own if I'm in the region to do that, and buy and trade locally. I'm just curious if we could talk a little bit about what is that desired outcome.
Can I take that one first?
Yeah.
So Mirabai is my co-director and my partner. We talk about this a lot. What does it look like? You know, she's here, so she could chime in too.
Yeah.
What does that look like for Black people to be in total charge of even just one aspect of your life, of your food? So it means we own the land, we're on the land, working the land.
Mm-hmm.
We control the transportation that takes the food, and Black Food Sovereignty Coalition is working on this right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We own and control the transportation that moves the food from the place where it's grown to the market. We own and control that market. So we are profiting from the things that come from the land. So we're making secondary products. We don't just have limes. We got liqueurs and all kind of, I don't know what the hell else you make from lime, because I don't know, whatever, but you know, we make all the products from the food. We control the packing, the co-packing facilities where the food is packaged. You go to our stores to buy it. And that money comes back to the community, right? Like from end to end, we control that system. You as a Black person in America, just like a white person, should be able to go buy a thing in a store, look at it, it's culturally familiar to you, and you can go to where it's grown and know that you're in total, somebody who looks like you, who has your interests in mind, is in total control of that process from end to end, right? And if you want to go have a place in that industry, if you want to learn, there's a place for you to go do that. It's accessible, right? It's not foreign. You don't show up and people look at you like you crazy and you don't belong there, or they don't microaggress you the whole time you're there trying to make you feel dumb or uneducated because you don't know how to do this thing, right? So Black Futures is about that. You can just come and sit. We have Black Sundays every Sunday. Not now because it's cold and it's COVID. But up until we couldn't do that, we were having folks come out and we tell them, you don't have to do anything. Just be here and be Black and be with us. And we're going to feed you, and you can get in the dirt with us and learn, or you can watch until you feel comfortable, or do nothing. You can just run around and be here. Come take a nap, study, do whatever you want to do. But it's important that you know that this is your place, you know? And when we can work on that kind of feeling of like, oh, this also belongs to me, right? Like I have a stake here, I have a place here. Then we can remove some of that alienation that was forced on us from the shame of being in bondage. My family was in slavery. My people from North Carolina.
Yep.
My dad's great-granddad was in slavery, and my mom's great-great-grandmother was in slavery. So I'm not that far away. I'm like 3 and 4 generations away from being in bondage.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that long ago. I was born in 1970. I'm in the first generation of people born fully free in my family. And when I say fully free, I mean like can vote, live anywhere you want, do what you want to with your life. There's no legal. So if I'm only 50,
yep,
and I'm the first generation born completely free in this country, you know, what is that telling you about the system that we have? So we have to get back to the land. Like, and not all of us are going to do it, but enough of us have to do it to make it safe for the rest of the people when they want to do it.
Yeah.
You know, we have to be at the vanguard. And Black Food Sovereignty Coalition, Eddie, Mudbone Grown, Sky Island up in Hump Tulips, Roan up in Chehalis. There's a few people who are really doing this work and really pushing it, really pushing the boundaries that made it safe for me. I'm a new farmer, right? Like this is my first season. But because they had already done so much work, I was really able to come and ride in on their coattails. Me and Mirabai were able to come in and ride in on their coattails and really learn from them, right? And we're still at the vanguard, but there were enough people who were doing it like Eddie 20 years ago so that Malcolm Hoover could show up in 2019 and be like, hey, bro, I don't like, show me. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Malcolm. So the transformation, we talked a little bit about that, you know, what are some, I would like to know, James, and your ideas. I mean, when we think of this country, you know, land, it doesn't matter what's on that land. You know, it's just, that's what's going to get you generational wealth. I'm curious if you could touch upon a little bit of like, what are some of the policies that we need to be looking at? And Eddie, please, if you have some ideas as well. What are policies that we could look at that the community needs to be aware of?
Great question. And I mean, I think, you know, Malcolm started talking about outcomes. I mean, one of the things that I really hope comes out of this conversation, and, you know, but in the near future, is just a shift in terms of like the narrative and the realm of possibility and what's possible, right? I think that there's a reason why we have a vice president coming in who is a woman of color, who is Black, who is Asian, because they knew they had to, right? Because there's power. And so I want, my goal is, the outcome I want to see is an informed electorate that understands that the current way that we're doing things is not the only way to do things. If you think about policy and think about, and it was over the summer, the moms in Oakland, Moms for Housing in Oakland over the summer, these women took over homes that were vacant in gentrifying neighborhood, to the point, and because it was basically out of large investors that capitalize on people that have lost their home through foreclosure or publicly owned land or properties, and they buy them for cheap, flip them, and then they make their own money. It's all about this profit. And I understand this is a capitalist, you know, society, and it's all about, you know, self, but there are other ways of thinking about how we approach affordable housing. The same thing, Malcolm, you might not, you know, same thing happened in Philly. There were some unhoused women that took over an encampment across the street from the headquarters of the housing authority here. And after a couple of weeks of an encampment across the street, eventually they agreed to give 50 properties over, 50 city-owned parcels over to the people to develop affordable housing. Because the way that cities often approach it is like, oh, well, we have this, you know, people have lost their home because of tax, you know, tax delinquency. So the city owns this property. We're going to sit on it and wait until the market is a certain thing. Then we're going to sell it and use that money to build affordable housing. Make sure that the next development has X amount of units that are affordable housing. That's one way of looking at it if you want to lean into the market and do it that way. But also, if you're a city that you know has residents that are struggling with housing insecurity, and like Philadelphia has 40,000 publicly owned parcels, okay, there are other ways of doing it. I think, you know, we talk about community land trusts as one, where we're thinking about how cities are working with community-based organizations and activists to negotiate giving city-owned or publicly owned land over to long-term permanent affordability. Seattle has an example called Africatown Community Land Trust, where it's specifically for Black people. You know, that's one thing we think about land. I think Portland, I use you guys as an example in other conversations across the country for the way that you guys, I know, listen, hear me out, for the way that you guys lean into the value of land. From what I've read, it is like in gentrifying neighborhoods, you know, the increase in property values that are accrued go into a fund that can be used for things like affordable homeownership or affordable housing. That's not something that other cities across the country are doing. Once a neighborhood gentrifies and property values increase, people are just ass out, and you just can't afford to live there anymore. So how cities are approaching the increase in property values, in the increase in land values through things like tax increment finance, where you're capturing the increase in land values, through inclusionary zoning, where if you know it's a hot neighborhood, a developer should not be able to build there with the city subsidy unless they're developing housing that's affordable for low-income families. So I would say that those, and then the last one is social housing, right? So this is an big in Vienna, abroad. We think about over here in the United States, we have public housing that's specifically for those that can't pay more than 30% of their income towards housing, and you earn below a certain income threshold. In Vienna, over there, yes, they build housing for them, but also for folks in the middle. And what that does is it shifts the entire housing market. So a developer, there's more competition in terms of where people want to live, so the housing prices are not as dramatic or as drastic. Social housing, it is been proven, I think 60% of people in Vienna, in that city, live in some type of publicly subsidized housing. And as a result, the overall housing costs in that city are lower. So if we're not gonna, if we're gonna accept that capitalism is a way to go, the way that we're gonna go, then there are things that we can do. And I think that if we're holding our elected officials accountable, if we're holding all of the parties accountable and so that no one's taking anyone's vote for granted, then I think we'll start to see the change that we want.
Yes, thank you so much, James. And people kind of forget that when we're talking about land or we're talking about food or food insecurities, that's sort of siloed in some way away from housing. This country is built off of generational wealth, and the way you get that is through land or your home. And so brown people, we need to talk about policy around land and our home, our access to home equity, right? And things of what we can pass to our children. Because like Malcolm was saying, how are you 50 years old and just now coming into the conversation or coming into it? It's just that mindset of the capitalistic idea of pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps and making sure that I get what I need needs to die. We're going into 2020 has blessed us not only with time to think about what's happening in our system, but also realizing that we need to come together. And white supremacy is not good for everyone, including white people.
Yeah, it's not good.
White supremacy isn't good for anybody. It's not good for anybody.
It's good for the elite.
It's not just bad for us, but it deprives white people of their own humanity.
Absolutely.
In exchange for this thing called whiteness that is some made up shit that keeps you from being a full and a whole human being.
Yep.
I was raised by a woman who was Irish. I got a black mom and a white mom. And my mom, she was my mom for 34 years, and she was Irish. She wasn't white. And she was very adamant that there was a difference in her culture and the way she saw the world and her worldview and how people saw her, because to the world, she's just a white lady, but to me, she was an Irish person. And she saw the world through the just like I see the world through black eyes, and my cultural cipher is this. She saw the world that way.
Mm-hmm.
And most white people don't have the benefit of a home culture it's not based on the oppression of people of color. It's an oppositional identity that was created to keep them in some fictional like dreamland of whiteness. And it's bad for them. It prevents them from being fully human and in community with the rest of us, because the way that they have to be in community with us is to dominate us and to be on top in competition and to be at each other's throats. And it's not a good way to live. I'm not a capitalist. I wanted to say this. I'm a communalist.
Yes.
It doesn't benefit me to have a lot if my neighbors don't have any.
Yep.
I don't want to have colossal wealth so I can stun on people and look down at people like, you're so poor. Like, that's not exciting to me. I just want to live well, and I want everybody else to live well. And
I think that if anything 2020 has given us, it's just that idea that the system is not going to save none of us, including white people, and that we need to change that mindset of like how we're being with one another and what we're going to do about it. And that's exactly the mindset that we need to turn towards as that that collectiveness, that working together, and also encompassing how to be an advocate. How do we advocate for these things that James is touching upon when it comes to policy, or when Eddie's mentioning the Black Land Trust? Like, these are the forward movement thinking that we need to start participating in.
Yeah. To that point, there's some. I think this is a really good time. Like you were saying, that the value of COVID, the value of this. Now, they even got a freaking. I've been watching Bloomberg. The channel is in BBC News, and this great reset. I'm just like, oh snap! Y'all done already made it into an MIT weekend course study. So it's real talk, right? The industry of managing the navigating the new world, right? So I'm like, I at a certain level, I'm promoting the you know, the dialing, the policy of thinking that there has to be a policy, right? There's things within community. Like if you want to believe that the world is flat, go to hell on, right? And keep doing that. In fact, you know, die in the rocket crash that doing your thing. Like whatever you were happy, obviously. Right. If you want to be a white supremacist now, like you have to, you know, and it's showing. And not just in the US, right? This isn't an issue of just the US. Xenophobia and puritanism around whiteness in Sweden, in Czechoslovakia, in Croatia, in Poland, in Spain, in Italy, all of that is going down, and in Israel. So if you look at the global sense of this section of people that are going to take on the most negative, counterproductive, you know, Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, like obviously this is how humans go out, right? It's like, damn, I don't understand how they died out. Well, they kept some stupid idea that they could go into people's caves or houses and club their women over the head and drag them off. So they maintained that idea so much so that a whole group of them got stuck in Europe someplace. We found the bones and they all were like huddled together, and that was the last genetic sample of that, right? Mm-hmm. So the same thing is going to happen. It's happening now. We have people who are going to take a couple of generations to die. There's a couple of people who will always be nostalgic about Nazism, and if they pop their heads up, it you know, like in Germany, like it gets cut off, like, or in Greece, they all went to jail. Like there has to be very clear, which we don't have yet. You know, like we had it, but fascism is now like freedom of speech. Nazism has freedom. Everything's protected. So in the counter to speaking about doing what's right. So there's a whole culture now, and it's becoming smaller and big, you know, smaller and bigger in energy, smaller in size. That is the tiger in the corner that we now have to make a commitment to not attack or build a policy against, really is to pass by. Like, I ain't got no business with a white supremacist anymore. I'm doing business with my people. And I'm working with, you know, Wajimaya, and I'm setting up an economy that goes beyond your idea. Like, I'm not playing in Rome at the orgy while it's burning. I'm out in the fields away from Rome, you know, like setting up shop. And we'll pilfer from the, you know, from the ashes, the tools that we need to maintain reality for y'all, which is grow food, transform soil, build balanced shared economies, and stop tripping on each other like we did for the last 5 eons. Like, cut it. Like, we cool. I don't need an alien to come till we got a problem or to save us. Like, you know, that's us. I don't know.
I mean, you definitely touch upon that. We don't need to ask permission either, right?
Unapologetically, nah, because we've been asking permission, and look at this shit. Like, look where we at.
Yes, I think people are waking up to that idea that you know, we have some sort of cushion, and we don't. This next question I have for the group, and this is. And you could take it however, what do you think the biggest risk is to advancing our food system mission? Like, what do you think will be the biggest barriers? What do you think is gonna be our biggest concern that you would like folks here on the call to just have some sort of foresight on?
I'll go first. I would say that that the tendency for folks to think of change as a zero-sum game, right? Yeah. So that if other folks are going to gain something, that means I'm automatically going to lose. And we always at PolicyLink, we use the we call it the curb cut effect. I think other folks that follow John Powell call it targeted universalism. But when you invest in the and focus on the most vulnerable, everyone benefits. And we use the curb cut as an example. You know, when you think about the folks in the disability or differently abled folks fighting for access, right? The ADA, when they put the cut in curbs, you know, research shows that like 90% of people that are crossing the street cross at that intersection. It's not just people in wheelchairs. It is parents with strollers. It is food service workers with carts, and it is and pedestrians. And so, had it not been for that effort to focus on the most vulnerable, everyone might have benefited. So that's what an example that we use. And I think that's the biggest threat is seeing it that way. And I think you see it today when it's soon the day, like, or less than an hour after the projections were calling for Biden to come in, the conversation started. Well, what are we going to do about disgruntled white people? Like, how are we going to reconnect with disgruntled white? It was like less than 4 hours after the election was over. It's like, well, what about them? And you're like, and like, Malcolm and Eddie have been saying, what about the last 400 years? And so I think that, that is the danger here, where it's folks think they're going to lose. And if I have one more, and so I think the other thing that kind of concerns me, and I like to be wrong, I like to be proven wrong, is amongst intra-racial dynamics that need to do a little bit better, right? I think we saw this during the post the civil unrest over the summer with after George Floyd, and you have Black folks. Not every Black person was really necessarily embracing the all Black Lives Matter movement, and my Black trans sisters still struggle to be accepted amongst even in movements for the liberation of all Black people. Not all Black people are accepted and embraced. And then we have our other folks in the BIPOC community that see focusing on Black people and get concerned and may not readily recognize that anti-Black racism is really at the root of all of our struggles and problems. So that zero-sum game fear is what concerns me the most.
Yes, thank you, James.
No downside.
There's no downside.
No downside.
No downside. Like,
I love your positivity.
There's no downside. There's no. The current president, he told Black people when he was the most true thing he ever said was, "What do you have to lose?" Because most Black people who are doing okay in this country do so in our proximity to whiteness. And it is a precarious position at all times. The minute white folks get tired of your Black ass is the minute your life becomes miserable, right? The second you fall out of favor from being a magic Negro or their Black friend or whatever is the minute your life gets shitty. I cannot tell you how many times I've been fired, asked to leave, pushed out just for being Black and honest. Like, I'm not a bad person. I don't hurt people. I don't steal, I don't misappropriate company funds. I've never done anything like that. But the amount of times I've been asked to leave because I made people feel uncomfortable for being authentically myself, just however many jobs I had, that's how many times it happened. Until, along with Eddie and some other people, we created a place for ourselves. So there is no downside, right? The risk of being an independent Black person is the risk of being free. That's it. And I can tell you, I cannot go back. A lot of my friends and I have been talking about this. We cannot go back to the way things were. I refuse. Now that we know you don't have to, they can't force you to go into an office. People actually work just as much, if not harder, when they have a stable home environment to live in. We know that. We don't have to have, Zoom sucks for all the time, but we know we can get a lot of work done just independently, doing over email. The way that we have learned to restructure the American workplace is a testament to American innovation in a lot of ways. But if you Negroes don't see that you free off the plantation and stay free, it's on you. We cannot go back to the way things were. We can't. So that's the risk that we run.
Yeah.
Is running back to the plantation.
Yeah. Thank you.
The benefit is that we can learn how to be truly free and not independent, but interdependent.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm.
Our community here is, and I'm always yelling, I don't need to yell. Our community here is interdependent. We have Native people, see how I calm down? We have Native people, we have Latinx people, we have some cool white folks. We have everybody across the LGBTQIA spectrum, 2S. Yeah, we have all those people who are in deep community with each other, right? We are in deep community with one another. We have African immigrants. We got all people from all across the diaspora. We are in deep and loving community with each other. We are interdependent. We rely on one another in very real ways. And that is the future. That is how we have been. And that's the only way Black folks have ever made it. is for
Yeah,
us to make
thank you.
And if we don't, I'm gonna stop speaking that way. As we relearn how to take better care of one another,
Mhm.
we will move forward. So it's not as important as what happens in the White House or the legislative bodies. Our power is in ourselves and with one another. Our power is inside, because wherever Black people decide is going to be done, that's what happens.
Mhm.
You know, like we're the most generative power in the United States.
Mhm.
My wife said the other day, we were talking about this, I wish she hadn't walked out, but the Black people have shaped America and shaped the world. You know, it has been our consciousness that pushed the boundaries of what liberation looks like.
Mhm.
You know, and all these civil rights movements and human rights movements around the world, Black people pushed that line and said, this is what we demand. This is what humanity looks like. This is what is going to happen. And when we make that decision, when we say, hey, look, no more bullshit, this is what's going to happen. That's what happens.
Yep.
That's why we have a Black vice president who will likely be the second Black president. You know, if you want things to be okay, put things in the hand of Black women. I'm gonna say that. If you want things to be okay, give it to a sister and leave it alone. So, facts.
You are correct.
The salvation of all humanity.
Yeah. You know,
we all came from a Black woman originally, and a Black woman is the closest thing to God we have on this planet. So if you want things to be okay, put it in the hands of a Black woman.
Thank you. Yes. Eddie, I'm gonna let you go ahead and take the spotlight for a minute.
The spot. Yeah, and that's just shared. This is you know, folks are getting to see you know, this is what Black leadership looks like, right? And it's not it can be threatening, you know, like, and and interestingly enough, it's just a story. It's just the beginning, right? So it's just like, you know, like, I mean, with Will Allen or any Fannie Lou, you know, or George Washington Carver, or, you know, like folks before that, or, you know, and the cultivation practices that were managed and maintained despite enslavement, despite incarceration, that you know, this power lingers, you know, through the universe, and it's calling us to come back into alignment. And you know, as for, you know, some of the stuff it said earlier, you know, I do like to remind folks, mad respects and blessings to Rebecca and her family, and to somebody who has carried me in the last 8 years in Portland, Jomo Greenridge, that we just lost a couple days ago. A close friend of mine that always kept me centered in the things that I brought to him as who I was. And he was real straight. He's like, you know, you be on that Native American stuff, and don't they have, like, you know, there's 4 colors in the circle, and, you know, eventually, you know, white folks got to, like, you know, like, just like, we got to give them time. And, you know, it's just like, I'd be reading your stuff, and it's just like, you know, but, you know, I come at him with things and process stuff, and we both talk about all the different flags that are in the circle, and the circle will be healed regardless of how, you know, we're making it rougher than it needs to be. And this crisis is giving us an opportunity, you know, so, you know, he would align things more to the Christian tradition, and I'm more like space, you know, spacesuits and you know, aliens from other galaxies and dimensions. And between that, we had a really good conversation about how we can be in the now, how we can, you know, pay attention to who's working with you and who's working against you, regardless of what they look like, because there's devils in every face. This is planet Earth. Don't be fooled by illusions, you know, just like real basic stuff, you know, like, you know, and he kept me centered in that. So I don't know if I'm, you know, to the things that hold us up is like that dealing with yourself. You know, a lot of these meetings, you know, there's a singular person, and, you know, like Becky crying, right? Like there's, you know, like party don't start. There was a whole thing in the EDI movement like 5-6 years ago. You know, it's like party don't start till a white woman cries. You know, it's just like you don't have it's not a good EDI thing until some white person in the room is broken down and started. I'm not a racist. I'm married to a black man and I have mixed children. Like, you know, it's like, well, you can still be a racist. You know, and even how you married that man, you know, this is like, we was on the football team and my parents hated black people and I married him anyway because I love him. It's just like, that sounds like some therapy shit versus like how you should have played out some damage to your children. But, you know, braid your child's head, like look at YouTube and learn how to braid, you know, please, child, please, if you down, like, so I'm saying to be funny, but it's also not funny. It's some real shit. So, I think the next step is clear. The next step is assholes got to step, and people who are down with saving this planet got to bound up, and we got to work together and build a network. We got to solve these problems. I value the work you're doing, Venus. The staff, Nyanga just helped me out with that thing. We're doing a mediation with what is it? Another community-based organization that we've had some challenges with. I'm learning how to be a better executive. And that facilitation is going well under the auspices of Nyanga's better understanding of what our organization is dealing with and how we connected as Black men and Black people, and how Nyanga takes leadership and guidance from Black women, and how Nyanga used his position and his ability to navigate and do this work to help us build better relationship and lay some boundaries and guidelines and rules of operation on how to deal with this new kind of Black people. And I'll say new kind of Black people in the context of the white gaze perspective. It's like, damn, I've never seen you run at this before. Oh, I've never seen you start a farmer's market before that's registered with AFMA. I'm like, then you haven't been to Philly because they have a Black food czar, a Black woman who's the bomb. You know, or you haven't been to Milwaukee. And like, they're just like, where have you been? Oh, I've been to Oregon and Seattle. Okay, cool. You wouldn't see that shit then, unless you were in relationship with the community. Just like you can't get the mud bone unless you know somebody. It's like that. We're just small town, and that's okay. So we have the ability to solve everything we need to solve and destroy the last of the Confederacy right here at our fingertips. Because this is where it's at. This is ground zero for the last of white supremacy. It attempted to save itself before by nesting itself and rooting itself in the soil. And it's an invasive species and we have to pull it out like English ivy. Shit got to go.
And we got to do it together.
Well, yeah, you don't take out English ivy by yourself. You like pulling out like blackberries. Like, are you crazy? You don't do that alone. That's a team effort. That's some volunteers from Intel, bless my grandma.
Okay. Thank you, Eddie. Well, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I just really wanted to give each and every one of our panelists the last few moments to just what is the maybe one thing aside from what you were just touching upon, Eddie, that you would like folks here on the call to just leave with thinking about sort of the ideas that we've talked about already. That's the one nugget.
I mean, you talked about you underscored the importance of land and intergenerational and wealth and poverty. And I think I want people to think differently about how we think about how a city approaches land and its residents and the public and how publicly owned land is used. I want people to think differently about what could be possible. And I'll leave that there.
Thank you, James.
Ditto under the auspices of Black design, a Black-led and Indigenous-led design, ownership, and investment. Like, drop that $1 million on me to make a mistake, just like you dropped $1 million on, that kid coming out of Harvard. Like, give us the space to to do the stuff that we know how to do. Like after antebellum South, people were like, that's amazing. You were slaves. And then all of a sudden you were like in the Congress and you were building things and doing legal policy work. Yeah, because we wrote all that damn stuff for you. Are you kidding me? Like we built the library in Georgia. Like, we designed, who did all the pretty pictures? Us. So we were able to instantly translate that and convert that unrestrained into a economic force that freaked white folks the fuck out, including the Quakers and the Mormons. It was like, oh damn, we can't, that's too much. Like we like helping a slave, but we sure don't want to, have them marrying our daughters or living next door. So that kind of Scandinavian shit. So, so it's management of public lands that they've been holding in theft and giving us the opportunity to manage large tracts of it for 20 years, give me 50 years to solve a problem that you started.
Yep. Thank you, Eddie. How about you, Malcolm? What's been rolling around in your mind?
I try to be positive, like it's never too late to start to do the right thing. It's not too late for us to get together in whatever our affinity groups are to start to take charge of our own lives. It is not too late. We always at the farm we say, we on Black people's time. We on Universal African time. Which is the beginnings of time. The first people to mark the clock were in Africa. To mark the movement of the sun across the land was African people. We were masters of astronomy. So if I say Universal African time, it's got to be the right time. Yeah. So it's the right time for people to come together and to get to know one another and to break down some of this bullshit that we've been subjected each other to. It's time to spread love. We talked about a name and a concept that I would like to reintroduce to the public dialogue is revolutionary love as articulated by Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, which says that even if you and I have a disagreement, that you are vital to me, you're important to me. And I owe it to our people, not just to you or me, but I owe it to the people and to the movement to try to bridge these differences we have, so that we can move forward as a people. And I really try to practice that revolutionary love, man. Eddie and I work very closely. We don't always agree, but Eddie is always my brother. And so even as we disagree, I'm going to approach my brother with love. Like, hey, bro, we got to figure this shit out, because there's too much work to be done, and so we're not disposable. People can't be canceled or written off. A human being is a human being is a human being. And that even applies to white folks, but they got to get their shit together, like really and truly. It's really time for white folks to think about who they are in this world and who they want to be. And Black people need to have that discussion. Like, who do you want to be? Who is it that you would like to be in real life? It's that time to manifest that right now. And I want to thank you, Sister Venus, for facilitating such a great conversation, for doing it in such an easy Black way. I'm so tired of being in these seminars and, you got to cut off people's mics and shit, and people can't be themselves, and it's uncomfortable and it's staged. And this has been very wonderful, and I'm incredibly grateful for you. Thank you for introducing me to my new brother James from the California 215. 215 versus the world.
I'm happy to connect
every day, all day.
Philly all day.
Okay. Oh man, I love everyone in this room and especially my panel here. Thank you so much, Malcolm, James, and Eddie. Now you can't get rid of me. I'm gonna find you. Everywhere we go.
Speed dial. No, we're good.
And I would just love to thank R&W too. I came into R&W as a groupie because I was in AmeriCorps and needed little hours. And y'all cracked open my mind and connected some dots and gave me some words to articulate my pain. And I really, really appreciate this organization to the bottom of my heart. You taught me, just as what all three of our panelists have mentioned, if we focus on centering the people that are most impacted, we all benefit. And that is the concept of this organization. That is the heartbeat that I rest my head on. And I feel so blessed This is definitely my tribe. And I'm really excited for the people that are on this call. If you've learned something, if you're curious about something, please reconnect and reach out to us or myself. Christina, our ED, gives us so much room. And I really appreciate everyone here. Thank you so much. We will be coming back together here. Actually, I don't know when, but it's going to be another cooking show. Christina has the info.
Yeah, so thank you, Venus and Eddie, James and Malcolm. Unbelievable conversation, so rich. We will be back at 4 o'clock. We are going to be here with Chef Carlo, who owns the restaurant Magna PDX, and we're going to be talking about food appropriation in the restaurant world while cooking. And our board chair, Frida Davis, will be in that conversation as well. So you can use the same Zoom link. If you want to log back in, you can just stay logged in if you want. We'll be running some of those videos that you saw earlier when you kind of came into this conversation.